Disclaimer, when making this video, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild had a 98 on Metacritic. It now currently has a 97. Oops. With that in mind, everything I say reflects the 98, so please enjoy. All it takes is a quick trip over to Metacritic to see that people really like the new Zelda game. Breath of the Wild literally has the 4th highest score in the history of the website, behind only Grand Theft Auto 4, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and of course, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. So that raises a question. With only a 1-point difference between Breath of the Wild and Ocarina, is it possible that Nintendo's new console not only houses one of the best games of all time, but also the greatest Zelda game ever made? If there's one thing people on the internet love to do, it's to argue over which of their favorite games are the best. We constantly hear of titles like Knights of the Old Republic, Half-Life 2, Super Mario Galaxy, Metroid Prime, and of course, Ocarina of Time, all vying for the #1 spot in people's hearts. But there's a new heavyweight in the ring, and once the dust settles, will Breath of the Wild be taking the crown as the new greatest game ever made? I may be destroying my video by saying this, but it's honestly too early to say whether or not Breath of the Wild will beat out Ocarina of Time. As of writing the script, it's been about 4 days since the game came out, and unless you're one of the reviewers who got an early copy of the game, you probably haven't finished playing yet, because let me tell you, the game is massive. Like, more massive than Skyrim massive. We're still in the honeymoon phase right now, smitten by the joy of having a new Zelda to play, and therefore potentially blind to some of the more serious flaws that the game may have. The 98 Metacritic rating could be well-deserved, or perhaps we all just got a bit too excited at the idea of an open-world Zelda. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are many butthurt people who are giving the game 0s and 1s because the graphics aren't good enough, or they don't like how the game's not like every other Zelda ever made. Yep, there are just some people you can't please, just gotta accept that. Let's wait a couple of months so more people can play and sit on this new game for a bit, and then we can see if it's actually still deserving of its 98 spot. However, for the sake of an argument, let's say time has passed, we've poured over every inch of the game, and we still find Breath of the Wild deserving of all its praise. What happens next? Well, probably nothing will happen because it's just a game, and there are much more important things to do than argue over which pixelated elf boy is more deserving of our worthless praise. But for the sake of all you Zelda fans out there, and my subscriber box, let's dive in and see which is better. The magnum opus of 3D gaming, Ocarina of Time, or the new kid on the block with something to prove, Breath of the Wild. A quick preface before we get started. It's very easy just to yell out your opinions over the internet, but it's a lot more difficult to actually articulate and explain why you believe the things that you do. I'm going to try and give reasons for why I think both games are deserving of the #1 spot, and then I'll say which one I feel is truly the Mac Daddy of video games. Please remember, this is all just my opinion, but I do think that what I'm about to say is well researched and strongly grounded. Anyways, since we're on the subject of the best game ever, what exactly makes a game stand the test of time and be considered great? Is it the graphics, the story, the gameplay, or something else entirely? For me, I think that a game is deserving of a high place of honor when it either redefines how we look at games as a whole, a la Half-Life 1, Super Mario 64, Halo 1, or when it takes an existing concept and polishes it to near perfection, a la Half-Life 2, Super Mario Galaxy, or Halo 3. Both Ocarina and Breath of the Wild reign supreme in their respective categories. Ocarina was one of the early pioneers of 3D adventure games, and Breath of the Wild is the closest thing we have to a perfect open-world game. That does make it a bit more difficult to compare and contrast the two, since both games are popular for separate things, but I think we have enough points in common to find an answer. Here's what I think. It's entirely possible that Ocarina and Breath of the Wild are both the greatest Zelda games ever made, but strictly for the times they were created in. Hey, I know that sounds like a cop-out, but think of it this way. If we were judging both games by today's standards, Breath of the Wild would clearly be the winner. Wow, okay. Put those things away, people. It's not the end of the world quite yet. Seriously though, stop for a second and ponder my point. If you plopped your 13-year-old cousin down in front of a TV and made him or her play both of these games, which do you think they would prefer? If they're like 90% of the gaming demographic today and have been spoon-fed, action-packed first-person shooters, massive open worlds, and dare I say it, games with
voice acting,
then they will definitely pick Breath of the Wild as their game of choice simply because it's more in line with what a modern game looks like, and it has benefited from 2 extra decades of game design. If you made cousin Pedro over here play Ocarina of Time, and they were forced to endure the slower pacing, the blocky graphics, and the painful to use N64 controller, then they may just end up swearing off of Zelda games forever because, let's be honest, by today's standards, Ocarina of Time looks like your grandparents' game. And no, I'm not talking about the nicer 3DS remake, I'm talking about the blocky, chunky, low-res Nintendo 64 version. So obviously, that's several points against the game, but Ocarina is still considered by many to be the greatest game of all time. And that's because this game didn't come out during the time of shooty bang bang action and wireless internet. It was released during a time when almost no one had ever played a 3D game before, and it utterly changed the landscape of gaming forever. If you had been a kid during this time, the closest thing you probably had to a 3D action adventure game was either Star Fox or Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. If you came into Ocarina of Time after playing those titles, then the game would have absolutely blown your adolescent mind. The new Zelda had everything. A gripping story, tight controls for its time, epic boss battles, and of course, a literal new dimension through which you could play your game. This title, along with Mario 64, created a template for how to create video games in the third dimension, and if you pay attention, you can see how countless games released almost 20 years in the future are still following the trail that this game blazed. If this contest was based purely on lasting legacy and influence in the gaming sphere, then Ocarina of Time would definitely be the winner. But at the same time, that would hardly be fair for Breath of the Wild because it's only been out for about, 8 days compared to Ocarina's roughly 6,940. And now, we get to Breath of the Wild, which by today's standards is a near-perfect game, minus the iffy frame rate, a somewhat unimpressive soundtrack, and some low textures. While it may not have reinvented the wheel like Ocarina, it instead took an existing formula and brought it to heights that the gaming world has never seen before. The game is open and expansive, brimming with content, and takes the Zelda series in an invigorating new direction. It discards many of the old patterns of the franchise, and it sets out to create something new and never before seen. Sure, it's not creating a new genre of games like Ocarina did, but not every game needs to try something new every time. Sometimes the name of the game is refinement, not innovation. Think of it this way. Would you have liked it if television companies decided that their black and white televisions were perfect the way they were and they should never try and improve their original product? No, that would be terrible. Nobody today wants to stare at a black and white 4x3 television all day. We want bright, vivid colors and 16:9 high-definition widescreen. And it would be incredibly hard to go back to doing, or rather, viewing things in a way that we know is no longer the best method. What I'm saying is that it's not always the best idea to stop at the first iteration. And perhaps you could say what color and high definition did for television, so too did Breath of the Wild do for open-world adventure games. Sure, Zelda didn't invent the open-world genre, but go play the 2006 open-world Elder Scrolls game, and I think you can clearly see that the new Zelda is a major improvement over that game. So if you're still watching this video and you're torn between which of these two games is your favorite, ask yourself this question. Do you prefer innovation or refinement? Both games do a bit of both, but Ocarina is fondly remembered as the first bold step into 3D gaming, whereas Breath of the Wild will most likely be remembered as the mastering of 3D gaming. It's almost not fair to compare these to each other because both of the games were so important and impactful for the time they existed in. But we need a verdict, so I'll give you one.
Please remember that all opinions expressed are purely my own, and please don't hate me if I have a different opinion from your own.
After thinking it over and looking back at both games, I think I can safely say that the #1 spot in the Zelda series truly belongs to, drumroll please, The Legend of Zelda CDI Collection. Yes sir, it takes real talent to make a group of games truly this terrible, and the people over at Philips should be rewarded for their... Just kidding, it's Breath of the Wild. When asked what your favorite car is, you don't say the 1915 Model T Ford. And if I wanted to know the best place to post information about myself online, you wouldn't tell me to use MySpace. Unless, of course, you hate me for posting this opinion on the internet. Both of these things were good and useful for their time, but there are much better alternatives to both today. So too, if a newcomer to the series asks you what the best Zelda game to play should be, I think that you should tell them to play Breath of the Wild. The game is great because it represents decades of learning on the part of Nintendo. They've taken the best parts of their older games, combined them with the stylings of modern gaming, and they have created a new title that will be remembered for years to come, just like Ocarina of Time before it. Now, before you all form a mob and come after me, I'm not saying that Ocarina is stupid garbage and something that should be thrown into a fire. No, if anything, it should actually be revered for all it's done. The game is a cornerstone in gaming history, and it is because of this game and what it did that we even have this newest Zelda game to play and to talk about. If it's any consolation for you Ocarina fans out there, think of it this way. Ocarina can exist without Breath of the Wild, but Breath of the Wild could not exist without Ocarina. The best analogy I can think of for these two games is a grandfather to a grandson. The old man's already been on his adventure, and his days of traveling are over. However, he takes what he's learned during his long life and gives it to his eager prodigy who, armed with the wisdom of those that came before him, sets out to conquer the world with both his natural skills and his acquired knowledge. Could there be a happier ending? Of course, everything I'm saying could end up being a moot point. If you're watching this video a year or two from now and it turns out everyone actually hates Breath of the Wild, feel free to send me lots of hate mail telling me how stupid I am for not being able to see into the future. Remember though, this video was made assuming that the game will still be considered as good, if not better, than it is now. So hopefully there's not some sort of major upset down the road. I think Breath of the Wild is awesome, and I think Ocarina of Time is awesome. And if you like both games too, good for you. It's great that we live in a day and age where we can experience so many different games with greatly varying ideas and concepts. And if you don't agree with my opinion, hey, welcome to the real world. Thank you for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, you should definitely like it and subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with all the latest video releases. However, if you hated the video and want me to die for my blaspheming against the holy Ocarina, then you should totally like the video and subscribe. Thank you!